So good morning to all of you to our webinar on recent developments in geotechnical engineering. And our speaker is Professor Ravisankar Jaka. Let me introduce our expert to all of you. Then I'll briefly tell about our participants to our speaker. So coming to Professor Ravisankar Jaka, he is now working as an associate professor in the Department of Earthquake Engineering in IIT Roorkee, and he has a very illustrious career. And what I have got a 14-page CV, so I'll just briefly go through his CV. So he has completed his coming to his academic activity. He has completed MTech and PhD from IIT Delhi, BTech from Andhra University, Visakhapatnam. Then he has got also many awards and prizes. Received Young Geotechnical Engineer for Best Paper award in 2014 through IGS, and also got the STAD Fellowship during the tenure of this 2002 to 2003. Then also he has, to his credit, received University Gold Medal for academic record during 97 to 2001. I think it is BTech level. Then also he is awarded Sir Arthur Cotton Memorial Medal for adjudging as a best outgoing student in BTech by Indian Concrete Institute, Andhra Pradesh Local Center, Visakhapatnam, in the year 2001. Then also, to his credit, he has many international journals, more than 18, and for international conference, it is more than 16, and for national conference, more than 15. And also, he has edited some books and having the membership in ISSMGG, ISCT, IGS, and so with this brief introduction, and just one minute, sir, I'll just tell you about our participants. So we have got a very good response. As I was telling, more than 100 participants have registered in this course, starting from BTech second year to third year, fourth year, MTech dual degree, MTech student, PhD, then scientist, field engineer, consultant, then one retired chief engineer from Chennai Port Trust, and one professor from this Jimma Institute of Technology, Ethiopia. So with all this brief introduction about participants and about yourself, I request please start your presentation. Sir, please.
Professor Behera, thank you. Thank you very much for your kind words. And sorry for the confusion. I thought I have sent you my brief resume. It seems you have the long resume, and also that was quite old actually. Some brief updates, like I joined in IIT in 2010, and now working as associate professor from 2016 in the Department of Earthquake Engineering, IIT Roorkee. After I joined, I could able to guide 6 PhDs, and currently 10 PhDs are going on, and our research group produced about 40 journal publications in various reputed international journals, and more than about 65-70 conference papers. So that is just about the publications. And regarding the interest, I am basically working in geotechnical earthquake engineering in different aspects. Right now I will be discussing about the local site effects and all, and also I will be showing you what are the works that are done by our research group and all. Before I start, I welcome you all to this webinar. This webinar is a special webinar to me, though I organized more than 10 webinars during this period of lockdown on behalf of Indian Society of Earthquake Technology in the capacity as secretary. But as a speaker, it is a first webinar. I must thank the organizers for inviting me to deliver this webinar. I have chosen this topic, influence of local soil conditions on seismic site response and the challenges involved in their estimation. This is the most important topic in geotechnical earthquake engineering. You will understand when I present various aspects related to local site effects. In this presentation, I will be covering two parts. The first part, basically, I will try to make our students understand what are the local site conditions, why local soil conditions or site conditions influence the seismic site response. And in the second part, I will be discussing about the methods to estimate these local site effects and the challenges involved in their estimation. This is going to be my overall presentation, and I included as much as possible. So let us see how much I can cover in today's webinar. There is some problem. Yeah. So I am starting my webinars with the seismic hazards. I wanted to cover basics of geotechnical earthquake engineering here, since no other webinar in this series is not covering. So some aspects I will cover. Seismic hazards, as you all know, are due to earthquakes. So seismic hazards, like any other natural hazards, they are causing a lot of devastation across the world. Every year, we are hearing one or other bigger magnitude earthquake happening in some part of the world and causing lot of devastation. So there is no exception even for India. India has also experienced many large magnitude earthquakes. Recently in 2001 Bhuj earthquake, and afterwards even 2015 Nepal earthquake, Kathmandu earthquake, and like so many like Uttarkashi, Chamoli earthquake, and so on occurring. And as per the seismic zonation map of India, more than 50% of the land is prone to seismic hazards. That tells the importance of geotechnical earthquake engineering. So the question is, why we need to study seismic hazards? Yes, seismic hazards are going to be there, but can't we stop them? Can't we prevent them? Completely preventing means you have to stop the earthquake. Can we stop happening of earthquake? It's difficult. It's not possible. Like can we stop happening of tornadoes, or can we stop happening of hurricanes and cyclones? No. Similarly, earthquakes cannot be stopped. Okay. Can we predict an earthquake? That is also not possible. With the current knowledge, technical knowledge and developments we have, we can't exactly predict. Prediction means you should be able to predict when earthquake is going to, like on what time, on what day it is going to occur, and what is going to be the magnitude, and where it is going to occur. When you can predict all these three things, then you can say prediction. Okay. Suppose if you predict, yes, of course, you can take the precautions. So if you know when it's going to come earthquake, then you will move to the some safe place, open ground and all. So but that is also not possible. Then what is we can do? We can only do is mitigating the hazards, seismic hazards. Okay, reduce the effects of these seismic hazards, effects of earthquakes on property loss, on loss of lives. That requires understanding the seismic hazards, the mechanism of these seismic hazards. Broadly, we can classify seismic hazards into these 7 categories: ground shaking hazard, structural hazard, liquefaction, landslides, and so on. Out of these 7 seismic hazards, ground shaking hazard is the most important hazard. This is the hazard which causes, in fact, all other seismic hazards, whether you call structural hazard, liquefaction, landslides, and all. Thus, coming to structural hazard means damaging of structure like collapse or maybe some structural element damages due to earthquakes. So why they get damaged? When earthquake occur, the shaking will be there. That shaking also shakes the structure and applies the inertial loading on account of the shaking, and particularly horizontal loading. And mostly our structures are constructed for the vertical loading. And if this horizontal loading, inertial loading is significant, that is going to cause the damage to the structure. In unforeseen situations, it can collapse the entire structure. So what is the remedy? Remedy is constructing earthquake resistant structures. How we can construct earthquake resistant structures? If we know what is the level of the shaking at the particular location, then we can design our structure to that particular loading. Thereby, it is going to be safe under the earthquake loading during that shaking caused by the earthquake. And similarly, all other phenomena, whatever is liquefaction, landslide, they are all related primarily by the ground shaking hazard. Okay, let us see this. This is the footage recorded during the Nepal earthquake. So whenever earthquake occur, as we know, ground shakes. This ground shaking is not just confined to the epicenter region, even quite far away from the epicenter region it is going to happen. And when ground shakes, everybody is going to be panicked. Even those who are in the open ground where you don't expect any kind of problems, mostly they also people are going to be panicked. And suppose if you happen to be in a building, what would happen? This ground shaking, whatever happens, that is also shakes the building. And if it is so severe, it can cause the damage. Like during the Nepal 2015 earthquake, many monumental structures and all collapsed. Of course, we can expect these kind of damages to the monumental structures where earthquake resistant features are not included. But even surprisingly, in modern reinforced structures are also prone to damages. Okay, this is a very popular image. Here you can see overturning of apartment complex during the Niigata earthquake 1964. This image shows many things. Okay, one can understand local site effects, how local site effects are going to cause the differences in the responses of the structure. If you see carefully, this apartment structure is 1 minute. Yeah, this apartment structure is tilted so much. Okay, but structurally, if you see, there are no damages, no collapse and all. It's only tilting. Okay, but does it mean it is safe? No, because when it is tilting and many objects would have fallen and then caused a lot of injuries to the people living there and might cause even deaths also. And also after the earthquake, can we able to go and leave even if it is structurally safe? No. Okay, so that means one thing we need to understand: if you want to have safe structure, it's not just enough to construct our structural elements so strong, earthquake resistant. In addition to this, we need to also construct our foundations earthquake resistant, and also we need to prevent the ground failures. Any one of the failure occur, either ground fails or foundation fails or structure fails, your structure is going to be affected. Okay, and this, if you carefully observe, there are a number of apartment complexes. They all similar, but they experience different levels of shaking. Even the nest building experience different levels of shaking. This is basically due to local soil conditions. How these local soil conditions are going to play these kind of differences on the structural responses and all. So that we will see now. Okay, we will try to understand what are these local soil conditions and all. First, let us see what is the mechanism of ground shaking. Okay, then we will move on to the influence of local soil conditions. When earthquake occur, basically rupturing of fault is going to take place. So when the rupturing of fault starts, it's going to release stored strain energy. Okay, elastic strain energy, whatever stores because of the movement of the fault, that is going to be released, and that energy is going to propagate in the form of stress waves through the crust, and then at the site of interest it propagates from the bedrock to the surface and reaches the ground surface and thereby cause the shaking of the ground. Here, this shaking of the ground, as you can understand from this illustration itself, it depends upon where this rupturing is occurring, at what distance or what epicentral distance. Okay, when the epicentral distance is more, then normally the level of shaking is going to be reduced because of the attenuation. As the wave from the focus, you all know, I think this is the focus, when the wave starts propagating from the focus, what happens, it propagates in all directions. What we are showing is a ray path, but it is propagate essentially in all the directions. When it is propagating in all the directions, the specific energy per unit volume is going to be reduced, thereby it attenuates. That is one phenomena of attenuation. There is other phenomena involved. When the wave is propagating through the material, some heat energy is going to be produced, and thereby its amplitude is going to be reduced. So that is what we call popularly material damping. And the earlier one, the energy reduction or amplitude reduction due to spreading, is called radiation damping. So these are the two mechanisms. So as epicentral distance increases, these radiation and material damping are going to increase, and thereby shaking is going to be reduced. Apart from that, the level of shaking here also depends upon the size of the magnitude of an earthquake. If the magnitude of earthquake is bigger, obviously you can expect more shaking. If the magnitude of earthquake is smaller, you expect less level of shaking, because magnitude of earthquake relates with the energy release. More magnitude of earthquake, more energy release. Suppose if the 6 magnitude earthquake releases energy of a nuclear bomb dropped on the Hiroshima, 8 magnitude of earthquake is going to release 1000 times the energy that is released by 6 magnitude earthquake. Okay, so, and apart from that, there are other parameters that are also related to the source that influence the shaking. So that is the source parameters we call. Then after the source, what else is the path through which this energy is propagating. Okay, and the material properties along which the wave is propagating is also going to influence on the level of shaking. As I told you, when the path, the material along the path, if it has high material damping, the level of shaking is going to be less. If it is low, level of shaking is going to be high. That is what we call path characteristics. So mainly, as I told you in the beginning, most of the journey of the seismic waves from the focus to the ground surface is through the crust. This is all the crust portion. Okay, and only at the site of interest it propagates through the soil cover. Soil cover is just at many places it is a few meters, and after the few meters you encounter bedrock. So most, like several kilometers of journey is through the crust. Okay, and that is also going to be influenced, but finally it is going to propagate from the top of the crust, that we call bedrock, from the bedrock to the surface, and the soil here is also going to play an important role. As per the previous observations and all. The effects out of these three, like source, path, and local site effects, local site effects are going to play very important role. They modify everything. It may be surprising to know that since the wave propagation of the wave in the local soils is very small, like in few meters in comparison to several kilometers. Okay, that I will explain in the next slide. Our role, geotechnical earthquake engineer role, is mostly confined to this, not the source or path, and these information will be provided by our seismologist. And fortunately, our seismologists studied different faults and they identified what are the active faults and what is their potential, future potential of yielding a particular magnitude of earthquake they know, and also they know the path characteristics. Okay, so as they know all these things, they can provide the motion up to the bedrock. Okay, there are procedures called DSHA and PSHA, deterministic seismic hazard analysis, probabilistic seismic hazard analysis. From those analysis, seismologists, they can provide the motion up to the bedrock, but not at the surface, because these properties, they more or less known, because the crust, if you take the crustal property, is not going to change so much. Okay, there are slight changes at different places, but they all studied by the seismologists through the various strong motion records and weak motion records, so they know everything. But what about the soil conditions? Soil conditions, they vary from the site to site. Okay, you might have already known this. Even within the same site, borehole information from different layer information from different boreholes is going to provide a different information. Okay, sometimes layers, some new layers are going to pop up, and sometimes they are going to vanish altogether. Okay, and then maybe layers may not be having the same thickness and so many things. Okay, so considering those uncertainties and all, it's not possible for anyone to provide ground surface motion for all the places in India, or maybe suppose in Delhi, if you take, it's not possible to provide. Okay, of course, in this direction, some effort is going on in terms of seismic microzonation. Even seismic microzonation provides you the probable level of shaking over a region. Okay, over a region like maybe 1 degree by 1 degree. Okay, but it's or 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid area, but it's not, there is no guarantee that within that 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer area, the level of shaking is going to be the same. Like in the that Niigata earthquake photograph, you have seen very clearly there is a lot of variation. So that is the challenge for the scientists, earthquake engineers, in identifying the ground shaking at a particular location. Okay, you cannot generalize all the things because each site is different. So let me now explain why these local site conditions are going to play very important role as compared to all other. Okay, the changes in the wave properties by the local site conditions is going to be many times than the changes occurred when they are propagating from the focus to the top of the crust at the site of interest. Let us see that in this. So when you take any site, it is going to have bedrock. Bedrock is nothing but top of the crust and the soil deposit. Most of the places have the soil deposits. Okay, and the motion. Okay, some animation problem is there. 1 minute actually. Yeah. Now let us examine the conditions that are going to be at the site. Okay, So seismic, when earthquake occur, bedrock shakes. Okay, and say the bedrock motion is something like this, whatever you have seen. And what do you expect at the surface? Maybe little modification, not much, but really, if you look at these motions and then observe and compare, then you will understand that the surface motions many times, many places are going to be totally different than whatever the bedrock motion is there. Okay, so it is going to be different in terms of amplitude and frequency and duration. So in this simple time history, you can understand the amplitude is high and duration of the significant shaking is high. Okay, and the frequency content that you can understand when you draw the Fourier spectrum. Suppose this is the Fourier spectrum of the bedrock motion, and when you obtain the Fourier spectrum of the surface motion by carrying out the Fourier transforms, FFT, fast Fourier transform, then you will get the response Fourier spectrum of the surface motion and bedrock motions. And when you compare these two motions, then you will understand the differences in these motions. Okay, the basically Fourier spectrum tells us how the earthquake motion of different frequencies are going to have the different amplitudes, how the amplitudes of basically earthquake in the time history, if you see, it appears to be irregular motion, am I right, as you can see here, but it is actually a combination of several harmonics. Okay, these harmonics are nothing but harmonic motion, simple harmonic motion. They are going to have different amplitudes, different frequencies, and different phase information. So that information, what you can get from the Fourier spectrums. So here, for different frequencies, you can see the Fourier amplitudes. So if you see, at most of the four frequencies, bedrock motion is amplified, but at some frequencies, in fact, the bedrock surface motion is lower than the bedrock motion. That means the original motion, whatever is there, is attenuated, means de-amplified. Okay, it's not that when whatever motion is there at the bedrock, everything is going to be amplified. No, certain frequencies are going to be amplified, certain frequencies of the motion are going to be de-amplified. It is going to act as a filter. Okay, so why it behaves like that? It's really a question. Amplification one can understand. Okay, amplification one can understand because when the wave is entering from the stiffer medium, bedrock is a stiffer medium, into the softer medium, what happens? The impedance, specific impedance of the material is reducing, stiffness is reducing. Thereby, the amplitude of motion is going to increase in order to carry out the same energy from the bedrock to the surface, because these why motion is occurring, and these are basically due to the stress waves. Okay, stress waves, they are carrying the energy. So energy, when it is moving from bedrock to the soil, it cannot lost all the energy. Okay, suddenly. Okay, some material damping will be there, little bit lost, but it cannot lost. So in order to carry the same energy, the amplitude of particle motion is going to be increases. So actually the specific energy is depends upon impedance contrast as well as the particle motion. Impedance contrast is rho Vs and part u dot square. This is the particle velocity. Okay, and rho Vs is the shear wave velocity of the material, and rho is the mass density of the material. This rho Vs is called impedance, and this is indicating the particle motion. Okay, so when the wave is entering from bedrock to the soil sediment, the impedance contrast is reducing, the rho Vs is reducing, thereby the particle velocity is going to increase. So if this is the case, we expect all the frequencies to be amplified, am I right? So with respect of the frequencies, so this should happen, this is going to be the same, but that is not the case. Some are amplified, some are de-amplified. Why? So that we can understand when we assume this soil cover, whatever is there over the bedrock, as a single degree of freedom system. Okay, it's not single degree of freedom system, it is in fact a multi degree of freedom system, or much more, it's a continuum. So for a way to understand this amplification and de-amplification, let us take it as a single degree of freedom system. So I don't know whether all of you know single degree of freedom system. So most of you might be knowing single degree of freedom system, but for those who don't know single degree of freedom system, it is that's system which is going to move in only one particular direction. Okay, suppose if you hang a mass using a spring from the ceiling, it is a single degree of freedom system. Okay, so whenever you apply any force on it, it is basically going to vibrate in one direction. So such system you can say single degree of freedom system, wherein you need one single coordinate to represent the movement of the mass. Okay, so this you can also compare with the swing. Okay, so when you push the swing again and again, it is going to oscillate. The same thing here. Okay, and this amplitude of these oscillations depends upon, in case of single degree of freedom system, the frequency of the excitation, this is omega, and natural frequency of the system, omega n. Omega n is nothing but under root k by m for single degree of freedom system. Okay, you all might have studied. So every system, by the way, you all know every system is going to have its natural frequency. It wants to vibrate in, like if suppose if you pull any, like even a swing or pendulum in one position, and then if you leave it, it try to oscillate in according to its own frequency. Okay, at a certain frequency, that is going to be its natural frequency. Same thing here. Okay, so that natural frequency is also going to influence this amplitude. Okay, and it also going to be influenced by forcing frequency. Okay, this is what amplification factor. Okay, this is a static displacement. When the same force is applied on this system, whatever static displacement is there, that displacement how many times is going to be amplified or de-amplified will be given by this amplification factor. Okay, so let us see the effect of different frequency of excitation. Okay, let us take another harmonic motion. Okay, harmonic motion, or harmonic in terms of ground move accelerations, or maybe in terms of force. Okay, suppose if you are applying harmonic force having natural frequency omega equals to 0.25 times omega n, natural frequency of the system, then the amplitude is going to be 1.1 times, not much, it's not much amplified, 1.1 times. And suppose let us take another system, another case wherein the omega is raised to 0.75 omega n. Okay, then in that case you can see the amplification is 2.3 times. Okay, let us see by increasing this frequency of force vibrations by another 0.5 times omega n, that is omega equals to 1.25 times omega n. What happens? It further increases? No, it is, or more, it's slightly reduced. Okay, let us apply now in the fourth case omega of 1.75 times omega n. So in that case, what happens? The frequency, of course, we are increasing the frequency of excitation, but the amplitude is reducing. You can see in all these cases, it's not that when we are increasing the frequency of excitation, the amplitude is increasing. Okay, in fact, it's initially it is increasing up to certain value, and then it starts decreasing. So draw the response of the single degree of freedom system with respect to omega by omega n, then you will understand how omega is going to affect the amplitude at the different values of omega by omega n. You can see when the omega by omega n is becoming close to 1, the amplitude of vibrations are increasing from 1, from the static displacement to slowly increasing, and then becoming very high. And when this omega by omega n value increases beyond 1, what is happening? You can see it is reducing the amplitude, and then it is in fact reducing more than 1. Means, okay, this in this case like this. Okay, so this explains us why when different frequency of motions are propagating from the bedrock to the surface, some are amplifying, some are de-amplifying. Okay, those harmonics whose frequencies are matching with the natural frequency of the soil, they are going to amplify. Those who are not matching, they are going to de-amplify. Okay. Of course, the idealization that I have considered here is for the illustration. It is not really, as I told you in the beginning, single degree of freedom system. The soil is multi-degree freedom system. Each layer can behave as a one mass, and if you go into further sophistication, in fact, each particle of the medium is going to behave as a one mass, because our soil is not one solid. Okay, and each particle, in fact, it's not just going to have only one movement. Okay, it can have movement in all three translation directions as well as rotation. So that means each particle of the soil domain can have 6 degree of freedom system. So that explains the complexity involved in the analyzing the soil. Okay, but yes, when you go to that finer detail, it appears to be very complex and very difficult to analyze, but fortunately we can idealize many things and then we can easily find out the soil response that I will explain you in a while. Okay, so I hope now you understood why some waves are going to be amplified, why some waves are going to be de-amplified. Okay, so here in this slide particularly what we seen is how the forcing frequency is going to play a role on the amplitude of vibrations. Okay, now let us see, suppose the same harmonic, same force is applied on the different systems, how they are going to behave. Okay, so let us see. In this is a simple a virtual experiment of shake table. So here we consider the three different substances in 3 jars. One in the first one juice, the second one honey, and the third one the jelly. And we place on the shake table, and we wanted to apply the same harmonic motion. Same obviously we wanted to apply the harmonic motion on the shake table. Obviously, or as all these 3 substances are placed on the same table, so they are already subjected to the same level of shaking. Then let us see how these substances behaves, whether they are going to behave in the same way or they are going to behave differently. Okay, so I am playing the animation that we created. Yeah, you please carefully observe. I hope you are all able to see this animation. Okay, so I know there will be some lags, so I kept the movement very slow, low frequency. Okay, so that our video streaming will be able to show you the vibrations by these different substances. I hope you observe the vibrations of these 3 substances, and from these vibrations you can clearly understand that juice is vibrating so much, am I right? Then honey vibrating, then jelly more or less no vibrations. Okay, and where is this? Okay, it's not playing again. Okay, so then why we should worry about the soil? Soil is after a soil. Okay, but within the soil also there are different types, you know, clay, sand, silt, gravel, boulders. So are they going to behave same way? Let us examine another small experiment. Okay, uh, yeah, you can see the one case sand is there, in other case clay is placed and subjected to the same vibrations. You can see what is happening. then sand is behaving somewhat similar to juice and it is experiencing a lot of vibrations. Clay is somewhat behaving between honey and jelly and not much vibrations. Okay. Another thing that it's not only just like juice and honey, jelly, but there are differences. Okay, sand. In case of sand, it's not only subjected to the vibrations but also subjected to settlements. Okay, like you take a jar of sugar and then shake it. What happens? The sugar is going to settle down. Okay. Similarly, the sand, when it is subjected to shaking, it is going to experience the settlement rock, not only the vibrations. Okay, that's what actually makes the soil is a different material compared to the clay, and makes this is like make the sand as a vulnerable, in fact, during the earthquakes. Like this, normally in the static design, our clay is very much problematic, okay, because of the long-term settlements, consolidation, compression, and so on, and of course low shear strength as well. But under earthquake conditions, sand is the problematic. It's more vulnerable. Okay, it's not just because of the only settlements. Settlements are also obviously going to be a problem. Apart from the settlements, there is another phenomena called liquefaction that is going to occur. Because when the soil is settling, it's not just only solid portions. Okay, it is soil is a particulate material and it's a three-phase system. It has water inside. So when the particles are settling, what happens? They increase the pressure in the fluid, that is pore fluid, that we call pore water pressure. And when pore water pressure increases, you know what happens to the effective stress. It reduces. And when effective stress reduces, the strength is going to be reduced. Okay. And in extreme condition, when effective stress becomes zero because of the large development of pore water pressures, your shear strength becomes zero. That is what we call liquefaction. Okay, so this liquefaction, this is one of the seismic hazard, as we have seen in the list, is also primarily due to the shaking. Okay, that's why I told you the ground shaking is the cause of causes. Okay. So, of course, we will not go much into details of liquefaction and all. Now, in this case, it itself is a big topic. Okay, so now. From this experiment, we understood that the behavior of the soil, different types of soils is different. Okay, but are there any evidences in the past? Yes, there are many evidences. There are many case studies wherein these local soil conditions are observed. Okay, let us see those examples. Very quickly, we will go through these examples. The first one is Michoacan earthquake, 1985. So this earthquake caused a lot of devastation in the city of Mexico, which is 350 kilometers away from the epicenter. Normally, such a large distance, you don't expect any damage, okay, because wave is going to be attenuated. But that is not happened here. Okay. And of course, the similar situation we faced during the 2001 Bhuj earthquake. Okay, Ahmedabad, which is around 300 kilometers from the epicenter region, got damaged. And Mexican City also happened the same. And Mexican City is a very having a peculiar geological setup. Okay, it's a basin structure. It has three different types of geological conditions. It has rock, and it has lake region, and it has transition zone where the thickness of soil increases from the foothills. So like you can see, this is the in the plan, this you can see this is all the lake region, and this is the transition zone, and this is the foothills. So foothills basically rock. So this is the out rock. Okay, where there is no soil. Here there is some soil, and where is here the soil thickness in this deposit is up to 15 meters. It's like a basin structure. If you see, if you take any cross section here and then if you draw, then you will understand this this thing. It is going to be something, this hill portion and then rock and then transition and then deep. Okay, this so our this Mexican city is having this kind of cross section. This is all sediment filled. So okay, soft sediment fill this basin, and here when this earthquake occur, there are a set of stations at UNAM is one observatory, there is another observatory SCT. Both have recorded. So okay, so the motion is available here as the motion is somewhere here is available. So these motions, if you look at the whatever motions recorded at UNAM and SCT, then you will understand the local site effects. So this is UNAM site, this is the time history, okay, at UNAM, and this is the time history as SCT. You can see this time history is not much, but here it is amplified like 4 to 5 times. Okay, and this is in the time domain, but same thing in the frequency domain. You will get the Fourier spectrum, and then further you can plot the response spectrum. Response spectrum is very important in the design, earthquake resistant design of structures. This is required for the structural engineers to design their structures to be earthquake resistant. This response spectrum, in simple terms, it is a response of the single degree of freedom system to this motion. So this, whatever this UNMM, this response spectrum, whatever here you are seeing, this is the response of a single degree of freedom system to this motion. And similarly, if you take another single degree of freedom system and its response is this. Okay, of course, I'm not telling you exact definition. Okay, it is not in fact one single degree of freedom system. It is the response of a single degree of freedom system to the given motion having different frequencies and dampings. Okay, so it is a response of series of single degree of freedom system having different periods. But whatever it is, this response spectrum tells us the inertial loads that are going to act on the structures of different periods. Okay, particularly if you see in this case, the structures which are having the periods of 2 to 3 seconds, they are going to subject very high inertial loading. Okay, SA is going to be like in the order of 0.7 G. Okay, so high. And whereas in case of this rock outcrop motion, it is very small, maybe it's a 0.1. So you can see how many times it is amplified, several times amplified. And this is what the reason why the structures in lake tip region got damaged very severely. And also the damage in the lake zone is not same for all the structures. Okay, only the structures which are in 5 to 10 or 20 stories, they got amplified because their structural periods are going to be in the range of this 1.5 to maybe 3. Okay, and then that's why they are damaged, but other structures slightly damaged. Okay, so this is the best example of the local soil conditions. And in fact, earthquake engineers understand and realized the importance of local site conditions on the ground shaking after 1985 Mexican earthquake only. Okay. And during almost in the same time in 1989, another earthquake have occurred that also illustrated these local site effects very prominently. That is Loma Prieta earthquake 1989. So here during this earthquake, the epicentral region experienced shaking of on MMI scale 7. And but at 100 kilometers away in the San Francisco area, the intensity of shaking is 9. Again, it is little sounds odd. Okay, near the source where energy is releasing, the shaking is less. Where away from the source where the spreading of wave energy is taking place, there it is high. Okay, the reason is basically local soil conditions. They are amplifying so much the vibrations. Okay, and also there is a very interesting thing in this case history. There are 2 islands Erba Island and Treasure Island. Erba Island is rock island. Treasure Island is this soft. So it has a bay mud. Okay, soft soil deposit, and both are at the equidistance from the epicenter. So when both are at the equidistance, what we expect, same level of shaking, but accelerations in the Erba Island are of order of 0.06 g and 0.03 g in different horizontal directions, whereas in case of Treasure Island, it is 0.16 g in east-west direction and 0.11 g in north-south direction. You can see clearly it is amplified around 3 times. Okay, so in, of course, north-south component is several times actually that component is amplified. So that again explains us the importance of these local soil conditions. Um, so you can see this is the record at Erba Island, this is the Treasure Island. Okay, the amplitudes you can see very high compared to these amplitudes, and the response spectrum also you can see the way we in this Erba Island and Treasure Island several times it is amplified. Okay, so that illustrates us the importance of these local soil conditions on the ground shaking and thereby in the design of earthquake resistant structures. Okay, the different spectrums for different soil conditions. Okay, so uh, this figure is taken from the Seed et al. 1976. What he did is he collected records from different past earthquakes recorded on different soil conditions, and then he averaged and then he presented. Okay, so here there are different response spectrums are, you can see normalized response spectrums. So if you compare these response spectrums, first of all, like this is only rock spectrum, and all other spectrums are this, whatever here shown, they are all soil spectrums. So you can appreciate one fact that soil response spectrums are all are different from the rock response spectrums. Okay, and generally what is happening, the soil spectrums are widening compared to the rock spectrum. Okay, of course this fact is even considered by our IS code. Our IS code normal spectrums also, if you see, this is going to be something, sorry, this is something like rock spectrum, and then the soil spectrums for medium soil they are presented something like this, and for soft soil something like this. Okay, so our IS code, it has considered the effect of widening of the spectrum due to the soil conditions, but what it didn't consider is the amplification. Okay, these can be amplified, particularly in case of steep soils. The rock spectrum can be amplified, it can be more than this rock spectrum, as you can see here. And also our widening, whatever our IS code provides, that may not take care of all different types of soils. Okay, if the soils are soft, as in this case, they are going to widen the spectrum even at very long periods. You can see it is not just only small portion widening, it is widened here. This portion is totally widened. Okay, in compared to the rock, suppose this is the rock value at this, say, 1 second period, this is the value of rock spectrum, but the soil, like soft soil deposit spectrum value is very high. Okay, these kind of things are going to be specific to the local soil conditions. Okay, and these are very important, particularly for tall structures, like in National Capital Region, many tall structures are coming up. Tall structures are going to have the long periods. Okay, and if there is any mistake in considering the appropriate earthquake shaking, okay, then that can cause total havoc, because the difference is so high. okay, when you don't consider. And particularly Delhi region terrain, as I told you earlier, it is very peculiar. It has different type of subsoil conditions, like in JNU and all. It's rock outcrop. As you move towards Yamuna, the soil deposit is going to increase, thickness is going to be increased so much, and you can't even find the bedrock. So, and particularly in NCR region, Noida, many tall structures, 50, 60 story structures are coming, which are basically founded on deep alluvial deposits. So there it is very, very important. Okay. And also each site is different. It's not that you can generalize everything, as I told you earlier. So for each site, you need to come up with this response spectrum. So that means for the structural engineer or earthquake structural engineer to design the structures earthquake resistant, they need the site specific response spectrum. Okay, so our discussions now is going to be towards how we can find this site specific response spectrum. What are the methods? Okay, so this surface response spectrum we can obtain by carrying out the ground response analysis. Ground response analysis is the process excuse me, in which we analyze the response of soil deposit to the bedrock motion and obtain the surface motion and thereby response spectrum and all. So there are different approaches available to carry out the ground response analysis: linear approach, equivalent linear approach, non-linear approach. And these approaches can be applied in 1 dimension, 2 dimension, or we can consider all the 3 dimensions and then carry out a 3-dimensional analysis. What is going to be appropriate depends upon the nature of the problem. Like suppose let us see the dimensionality of analysis depends upon how the properties are changing. Okay, how the variations are taking place. If the variations are taking place in one direction, 1D is going to be good enough. If the variations, stress variations, displacements, if they are in 2D, then you should take the 2D analysis. If it is in 3 dimensions you expect, then you have to take the 3D analysis. Suppose if it is a level ground, so in the level ground, essentially wave propagation is going to be upwards from the bedrock, is only one direction, and the soil particle vibrations and these things, everything are going to be in one direction. The changes are going to be in vertically. Okay, whatever particle motion and acceleration, displacement, velocity, everything. So in that case, for level ground, we can take 1 dimensional. There is no problem. But if it is something like sloping ground, yes, it is the variation you can expect in both the directions. So you need to do the 2D analysis. And if this slope changes in the other direction also, you need to go for the 3D analysis. Okay, so based on that, you can decide what type of analysis to carry out. Coming to the approaches, what approach we should apply. Okay, out of these three approaches, linear approach is of academic interest, because soil, we know very well, it is not linear. Even if you do the static analysis like compression test, if you do, you don't get the linear curve. Okay, the curve is going to be something like this. Okay, it's not like something like this. Even if you do track shear test or direct shear test, okay, that tells the soil is highly nonlinear. Particularly when cyclic loading, it is very, very highly nonlinear. You cannot simulate the soil effects using this approach. Okay, on other hand, nonlinear approach sounds good and sounds the best. Okay, you can apply nonlinear approach, but it requires advanced constitutive laws. Okay, it's a nonlinear constitutive laws you need to consider, and like considering the massing rules, non-massing rules, and considering the fluid and structure, solid particles interactions. Okay, by carrying out coupled and uncoupled analysis, so many things are coming to picture. So whatever constitutive law basically defines the mechanical behavior of the soil. Okay, so that constitutive law is going to be complex one when you want to consider all the effects nonlinear effects and all. So obviously to define that conjectural law, whatever parameters are required, they are going to be complex. There are going to be so many parameters you need to define a conjectural law, and getting those properties using normal testing is very difficult. As you know, when you give the work, site work for the two different agencies, both when they submit the final report, you can see lot of differences. Okay, even those methods which are very standard, there also you can see the differences. Then what to speak of such a complicated non-linear analysis? Okay, getting the parameter for advanced conjectural laws, it is out of question. It is of research interest, and those particularly, maybe suppose if you are designing nuclear power plant, there you have to be damn sure about the effects. So there maybe you can consider, you can go for the non-linear approach. Okay, otherwise you have to go for equivalent linear approach, or maybe there are simple non-linear models are there. Maybe at best you can consider that's all. So this equivalent linear approach, okay, even though it sounds that linear approach, but it is not just linear. It is going to consider non-linear behavior of the soil, and it models that non-linear behavior using the linear approach. Okay, so in nutshell, what it does is like our soil stiffness, it's going to keep on reducing. Even if in this simple graph, if you see, the stiffness of the soil is going to keep on reducing as the strain is increasing. Okay, so that means the stiffness is not same. Then in this equivalent linear approach, what we do with an equal, when earthquake occur, basically it is subjected to cyclic loading, whatever like this. Okay, so when it is subjected to cyclic loading, and in a soil medium, each particle experiencing different levels of strains. So from those strains, what we do is we will try to assess the equivalent strain. Okay, the average strain you can say, that is represents the strain induced in a particular element. Once you get the average strain, shear strain, so then using that average shear strain corresponding to that, you can find out the stiffness. Suppose this is the strain, okay, this is a strain, and then you can go there, and then here you can get the stress, and then you can get the slope of this curve, and that provides the stiffness. Okay, I'm just simplifying, and so like that, like it considers that strain, and then it does the analysis. Thereby, it considers nonlinear effects of soil in the method and the ground response analysis. Okay, and this carrying out this analysis you can't do manually, because there will be so many, like it depends upon the wave propagation principles. It considers the wave equation solution, and it applies the boundary conditions at different layers and compatibility conditions, and then come up with a transfer function, and that transfer function is the one that is going to be used to assess the variation in the stresses, strains, and displacements, accelerations, and all. Okay, so that developing such transfer function considering the wave propagation manually is out of question for the normal practicing engineers and all. So we have to use some softwares. There are different softwares available for carrying out the ground response analysis. Like as given here, this list is not complete. Like there are so many softwares. Even to carry out the equivalent linear analysis, you can use Shake, Deep Soil, DYNEQ, Rascale, and also Strata, and so on. For nonlinear analysis, these are the softwares. Okay, so I will explain you the process using the deep soil by considering the a particular case. Okay, example. So you can understand many aspects. It is a deep soil is a freeware. You can all download, and then you can all try. There is a lot of scope to use deep soil and study these local soil conditions and all. So I will explain those things. Before that, to carry out the ground response analysis, what is required? Okay, before we start analyzing, that is given here in this slide. So we need earthquake time history at the bedrock. Okay, So how to get this? This will be provided by our seismologists. Okay, so they will do the DSHA and PSHA study, and then they come up with a response spectrum. And from once you know the response spectrum, site-specific response spectrum at the bedrock, you can generate the earthquake motions, spectrum compatible motions, and then that is what you need in the ground response analysis. So that is one option. And suppose that is carrying out DSHA, PSHA for every site is not possible. Okay, when you are going for maybe tall structures, 50-40 story structures, yes, you can do. Or if you are constructing any nuclear power plant, or not only nuclear plant, dam, or maybe thermal power plant, you can go for site-specific studies. Many agencies they come to our department for these studies, and our seismologists they provide it. So that is there. But for simple structures, 1-story, 2-story structures, or maybe there also, if you want to consider, obviously you cannot do the DSHA, PSHA. The other option is you can you can use our IS code 1893/2016. So there for different zones, the spectrum is given. So first you identify the location of your site, where it is falling, in which zone it is falling. Then you go to the site code, and then pick the right spectrum, bedrock spectrum, and then generate the compatible motion, spectrum compatible motions. Okay, and that you can use. There are different ways to generate the spectrum compatible motions. One can take the white noise and then make the spectrum compatible. There are softwares, Seismomatch, Seismosignal, some softwares are there. And you can also take any natural time history. That is the best, because that can have the information about the amplitude and then frequency and phase information, which is some natural event. So that you can take, and then you can make the spectrum compatible. So anyway, so this time history is going to be made available by the seismologist. So you don't have to worry about so much about this. Then in addition to that, what you need is these geotechnical properties. You need to know what is the type of the soil, whether it is a sand, clay, silt, or mixture, and you need to know the properties. If it is a sand, whether it is loose or dense, and if it is clay, whether it is soft or stiff, and these properties you need to know. And that means you need to know the grain size distribution, you need to know the plasticity characteristics and all to make assessment about these things. Then you should also know whether it is saturated or not. That means you need to know the water table conditions at the site, and you should know shear wave velocity profile and modulus reduction and accumulation curves. These are all the information that you need before you proceed to the ground response analysis. Okay, now I will explain you how to carry out the ground response analysis using deep soil. So equivalent linear analysis using deep soil consists of these 5 steps. The first step, you need to define what type of analysis you are doing, equivalent linear or non-linear analysis. And the second step, you need to define your soil, number of soil layers, their thicknesses, and bedrock velocity profile and all. And the third step, you need to provide the input motion. Okay, that is the base bedrock motion. And fourth, you need to define controlling parameters, which more or less they are the fixed, okay, for standard analysis. Then finally, you can view the results. You can analyze the problem, and then you can view the results. These are the 5 steps. Let us see. This is the typical profile that is taken for illustrating you the use of deep soil here. So as you can see, there are number of layers here, having their different thicknesses. Each layer has a different soil properties: clay sand, silty sand, and so on. Okay, so and also the shear wave velocity and then PA values are available. So this is what information you need. So first question is how to get this information. Up to what depth you need this information. This is very important. Suppose if you are constructing normally a foundation, okay, so where you place the foundation normally, not in the clay certainly, because clay is a softer medium, you don't get much resistance, so you will keep somewhere here. So when you are planning to place your foundation at say 4-meter depth, up to what depth you are going to normally do the investigations? Suppose if this is the width is say 2 meters, so you will try to investigate maybe 4 meters or maybe at maximum 6 meters below it. Okay, to 3 times, maybe 3 times the P. Okay, you do to just to see. Of course, the soils up to 1B or 1.5B is going to be mostly affected, but there may be some surprises. There may be sudden soft pockets, and also you go up to 3B distance. Okay, that is what we do normal investigation. But in case of ground response analysis, that is not sufficient. Okay, in case of foundation loading, normal foundation loading under static, the soil up to 2B maximum is going to affect. Okay, bearing capacity or maybe up to 5B is going to affect the settlements and all. But in case of earthquake, the earthquake is coming from the bedrock. Okay, and whatever layers are there above the bedrock, they all going to take part in the vibration characteristics. They are going to play important role, then modify the motions. So ideally speaking, you need to have the information of the soil layers starting from the surface to the bedrock. Even if it is say 100 meters below, then you need that information ideally. Okay, it's not that that means normal site investigations are not going to be sufficient. Okay, normal site investigation targeted foundation design. So for this carrying out the ground response analysis, seismic hazard analysis, you need to drill boreholes to the deeper. Okay, so up to what depth you can drill? In some places the bedrock is not just at that 100 meters, some places even 200 meters, even 100 meters drilling borehole is out of question. Like it's going to be very expensive. Okay, maximum maybe 20-30 meters you can go, or maybe 40 meters also you can go. Okay, so then what to do? So there is a solution, and soil above the bedrock, not entire soil is going to influence significantly. It is going to take role, but in normal conditions, only soil above top 30 meters are going to play very important. Okay, so minimum investigation depth is going to be 30 meters. Okay, if you don't encounter the bedrock. If you encounter the bedrock, yes, you can stop. Suppose if the bedrock is at 10-meter depth, so you stop at the 10 meters and maybe little bit into the bedrock to know the bedrock characteristics. But just that is also going to play important role, as you can understand later on. So this 30 meters is important. Okay, or in fact, if you can go more, maybe few meters, you should go 5-10 minutes. Sometimes you will encounter some maybe surprises below. So you consider at least 30 meters, and then if you don't encounter the engineering bedrock at the 30 meters, the simple thing is you can assume the engineering bedrock at the 30 meters. Engineering bedrock is the bedrock having the velocity of 760 meter per second, shear wave velocity of 750 meters per second. You can assume that, and then you can proceed. Okay, this is what the difference between the normal investigations for foundation design and the sites, seismic site investigations that are required for seismic site response analysis. Okay, you can say seismic site investigations for the seismic site response analysis. Okay. So anyway, in this case, hopefully we must have considered about 30 meters, or maybe here itself in there we encounter the elastic bedrock having the engineering properties. So we are not going further down. So here these are the different layers. Let us see in software how we are going to input this information. The first step, as I told you, we need to check the water pipe analysis. So we are doing the equivalent linear analysis. It's a basically frequency analysis, and then inputs we are going to give at the different points. Okay, so this is some options are default. Okay, basically most importantly, this you need to define what type of analysis. So it is equivalent linear analysis, and in the second step you need to provide the soil information. So number of soil layers, whatever is there, 1, 2, 3, and 7 layer, and then bedrock you need to provide number of soil layers, and then thicknesses. For each soil layer you need to provide a thickness, and you need to provide the unit weight and shear wave velocity and other things, effective stress and all it is going to calculate. And then what is required is modulus reduction and damping ratio that you need to provide for different strains. this is the very important parameter that you need to consider in your ground response to carry out the ground response analysis. Ideally, for each soil layer, you should know this information. Okay. And there are different options. One is you can do the testing. The other one is you can consider the standard curve. So I will explain this again. Then coming to the bedrock definition, it's not just enough to define only soil layer. You need to also provide the bedrock properties. So bedrock properties, if you consider rigid house space, you don't have to provide anything. Okay, rigid means it's infinitely stiff material. But that is going to pose the problems. The response is going to be totally different when you consider rigid. Okay, so you have to consider elastic half space for getting the reasonably accurate results. So when you define the elastic half space, you need to provide its shear wave velocity. So this is the reason why you need to have investigations even in the rock for carrying out the seismic site response analysis or ground response analysis. Okay, so particularly what you need is this shear wave velocity of the rock, and the other thing, unit weight. Okay, you know unit weight is not going to be that much vary, and then its influence is also not going to be so much. Okay, once you have all this information and feed it into the software, then you are ready. So you can see what information you have given, how shear wave velocity is varying. It will make a plot at the end, and then it will show. So you can cross check if you have made any mistakes, you can correct it. And similarly the frequency, and this is all computed based on whatever inputs we gave. So just to give you feel of values that it is computing. Sometimes if there is any error in the inputs, then it might compute some very absurd value. So that you will get to know from watching these slides. Okay, two plots. In the third step, once you define the material properties, layer properties and all, and the third step is selection of input motion. Here we consider the stitching motion, which is already available in the database. Okay, that is the time it occurred in Taiwan. So you can consider any earthquake motion, whatever spectrum compatible motion that you generated, that also you can give as a motion. This is option add input motion is there. So using this option, you can input whatever motion you wanted to for give to your model. Okay, then this is about the controlling parameters. Okay, some controlling parameters you can use the default, that is good, like if you don't have knowledge. Otherwise you can also modify these values. That is like number of iterations. Number of iterations, basically 20 default, and 20 is very good number. Okay, but some value you need to keep. Otherwise, if there is some problem in the numerical analysis, if there is some numerical instability, then the software may hang up. So to control that, you need to provide a number of iterations. Because this actually, like, remember, it is the analysis is not carried out in one go. Okay, it's non-linear analysis. In the linear analysis, it is done in one go. In non-linear, in the equivalent linear analysis, the analysis is repeated again and again. Okay, what we do, and initially for the different soil layers, we'll assume the some initial stiffness on damping ratio, and for the motion we that software analyzes. After analysis, it is going to get the strains at different points, and from those strains, again what it does, it computes the strain compatible modulus. Okay, and then that modulus again use, and then again it will do the analysis. So it continues this process iteration till the initially assumed what modulus before the start of the step equals to the strain compatible modulus obtained at the end of the step. Okay, so for that purpose we need to define. So normally in 4 or 5 iterations it is going to complete. Compatibility is going to be achieved. Okay, then the other thing is this effective shear strain ratio. Normally we are going to keep 0.65 times. Why this? I will explain you. Like at any point, if you take in the soil medium, and then and if you draw the strains induced in this soil element, they are not going to be harmonic, so they are going to be irregular. Okay, something like that. So which strain you are going to use? Because for each different strain, the value is different. So we need to convert this irregular motion into motion having the harmonic cycles, so that you will have uniform. You can come up with the average value of you will have this amplitude of the harmonic motion, and then that you can use to get the shear modulus from your modulus curve. Okay, so this is a shear strain and this is a G. Okay, so this you can use you can convert this in terms of 0.65 times of peak. Okay, this or maybe any other, like it's not that you have to have this 0.65, you can do anything, but normally this is what used. And the most correct approach would be finding SSR based on the magnitude, because as the magnitude of the earthquake increases or decreases, the effects are going to be different. Like suppose high magnitude earthquake is there, it is going to apply more number of cycles. So when it is applying more number of cycles, its effect is going to be certainly different from that magnitude of earthquake which is applying less number of cycles. So for the both the cases, assuming that it is it is equivalent to 0.65 times tau max. Okay, this whatever tau is there, that is going to be erroneous. Okay, it's not representing the true value. So if you want to take care, that also you can do it. Okay, either you can select this one or that. And then because since we are doing the frequency domain analysis, and we have to consider frequency independent shear modulus. This is very important. And also in this soil, the frequency is not going to affect. There are some studies going on, but if you read the theory, then you will understand. You all know soil is defined as hysteresis. What is hysteresis? Hysteresis means itself indicates that irrespective of the frequency of motion, the stiffness and damping are the same. They are only dependent upon the strain. Okay, but there are controversial studies. Some people say in the literature that it is going to affect. Some people say it is not going to affect. So, but as per the most of the textbooks and standard literature says it is not going to affect. And particularly you are doing the frequency domain analysis where you are going to assume the principle of superposition valid. So there you cannot consider the frequency dependent. Okay, you have to consider frequency independent. Okay, the other step, this is the time domain. This is when you are doing only nonlinear analysis, then you need, and then this is where output is required. That is what it is all about. Okay, so this is the output that we obtained from the deep soil at the surface. This is acceleration time history, velocity time history, and displacement time history. Okay, these are the Fourier spectrums and response spectrums of the surface motion. Okay, this is 5% damped surface motion, this one, and this is Fourier spectrum, and this is Fourier amplitude ratio. It's also called as transfer function. It tells how much it is amplifying the bedrock motion at the different frequencies. Okay, most of the our engineers, structural engineers interest is this spectrum which is required. Okay, the comparison of the bedrock spectrum and the output that we obtained at the surface is shown here. You can see it's very much amplified. And we did one more analysis. We considered the same Chi motion, and what we did is we amplified the motion by 2.5 times and then did the ground response analysis. Okay, so ideally what we expect, then it is going to be the same shape, but maybe it is going to be something above it, something like this. Okay, but if you see, the result is different. It is not like this. It is the curve itself is shifted towards the right, and the amplitude also reduced. Okay, so this is because even the soil nonlinear properties are going to change with respect to the amplitude of motion. Okay, so nonlinearity, because simply people say it's because of the nonlinearity, the response is going to be different. That's what you can see, and there is a shift in the peak. Okay, so that's why whenever there is a big large magnitude earthquake, they can adversely affect our tall structures. This is one reason, and of course there is another reason is in case of large magnitude earthquake, corner frequency is going to be low. Means, the amplitudes of the even the bedrock motions at the low frequencies are going to be very high. Okay, so the response, as you know by now, the response, surface response depends upon the amplitude and the frequency of the excitation, the base bedrock motion, and the soil, both going to. Okay, that's why large magnitude earthquakes are very dangerous to the tall structures. Okay. In I don't know how much time I left. In fact, I included so much information. It is already 12:40. So I will, yeah, I have to maybe give me, Professor Behra, maybe another 20 minutes, okay, so that I will try to touch upon the main important aspects. Okay.
Okay.
So, thank you. So I highlighted here our different publications, and I explained the main important aspects, practical aspects that are required for carrying out the seismic hazard analysis, particularly ground site-specific hazard analysis. Okay, but there are our group has done a lot of studies on local site effects. Those are list is provided here. So those who are interested to know more, particularly research scholars, they can, or MAMTech students, they can refer to these publications, and they can further plan their research. It has a lot of potential, this topic, and particularly the first one is where we studied the deep soil effect. Okay, so normally our codes and other things, seismic codes, they suggest to consider the soils up to 30 meters. Okay, as I explained you. But suppose if the soil deposit is beyond that, and particularly when it is soft soil, how it is going to affect? To what extent it is going to affect? How that soil conditions are going to affect the site classification, seismic site classification based on the VS30. Actually, once you have the, I didn't tell you the seismic site classification that is required for empirical studies. For actual site response analysis, whatever I presented here, that's not required. But empirical studies, what we need is, once we know the different shear wave soil layers and the shear wave velocity of each layer, then you need to compute average shear wave velocity of the 30 meters. Based on average shear wave velocity of 30 meters, site is going to be classified as site class A, B, C from the seismic response point of view. Okay, as the site class is increasing from A to E, the soil effects are going to be increased. Okay, and because site class A is going to have very high shear wave velocity, and B also, and then C is going to be reduced, and there is a NHRP classification is there. Please refer, then you will get to know. So these site class changes, whether they are going to be okay for the deep soil. Like you are in site classes, you are considering only 30 meters, but in the deep sediments, soft sediments, as I told you, even the soil up to deeper depth are going to play a role. So whether this classification is okay or not, some of our students have studied, and also some students studied how the bedrock is going to play important role on the site amplification. How this property is going to play role, and the depth is going to play important role. And there are some more studies are going on. Please refer this. Okay, let me discuss about the challenges in the estimation of the local soil effects. So some challenges, some issues I have already discussed. Let me discuss about other issues. The accuracy of the method basically depends on this ground response analysis. Depends on the method that you used and the domain, whether it is 1D, 2D, 3D, and reliability of inputs. So method of analysis, I told you equivalent linear analysis is good enough for most of the problems, and domain, I told you we can use 1D for the level ground, and then finally the accuracy depends upon the inputs that we are giving. So any method, whatever, even if you use the sophisticated method, the accuracy depends upon what type of inputs you are giving. Garbage, like there is a problem saying that garbage in, garbage out. Okay, so the same way, the inputs are most important. What are the most important inputs? Like most important inputs are modulus reduction curve and damping ratio curves for all the layers and shear wave velocity profile. This is the most important input. Okay, the other input is basically supporting. Okay, suppose unit weight is there. Unit weight influence is not so much, and then you know in soils unit weight is not going to vary so much. Okay. Then plasticity and all that that information is to indirectly come up with a modulus reduction damping ratio curves. Otherwise, the most important information that is required to carry out the ground response analysis is these two parameters. Okay, let us discuss about the challenges involved in the estimation of modulus reduction damping ratio curves. So each soil is different. So obviously, like see each soil when you do the strength test. Okay, direct shear and all like this is going to be different. Response is going to be different. You will get a different value of and different compressibility characteristics you will get. The same thing, modulus reduction damping ratio curves are also going to be different for each soil. So ideally, you need to come up with modulus and damping ratio curves for each soil. So how to come up? Okay, this cannot be for determined in the field. They have to obtain from the laboratory tests. Okay, but there are a number of laboratory tests, but no single laboratory test provides the complete range of modulus reduction and damping ratio curves. You have to use different tests. It's not like determination of the strength. You can determine the strength either from the direct shear or maybe triaxial test. Okay, but that is not the case in case of modulus reduction and damping ratio curves. You have to use different tests. Like for the low strains, either you have to use Bender element and resonant column, and then high strains you need to use cyclic triaxial. Okay, so it's okay. You can use the two different tests, and what is big deal? The problem is when you obtain the modulus reduction and damping ratio curves in low strain, high strain from the different tests, and then when you superimpose, when you place one with the other, then you will be having the tough time to match these results at the intermediate strains where you have the results from a cyclic triaxial and then resonant column. They will never match because each test, resonant column and then cyclic triaxial, they work on the different principles of loading. Their testing procedures are different. Okay, and the system because of the system compliance, they are not going to match, and he need to make certain corrections. Okay, so that is not that cannot be done by practicing engineers or maybe for normal regular this thing. Only in case of maybe no nuclear power plants and all, maybe one can do it. Okay. Then there is another challenge also, because these properties have to be determined in the laboratory. So you need to procure the samples from the lab, from the field, and then you need to do. So you know whenever you procure the samples, there will be a lot of disturbance. So you need to ideally get the undisturbed samples. Okay, so getting undisturbed samples is possible only in case of clay, not truly undisturbed, but undisturbed sample. But in case of sand, can you able to get undisturbed samples? And here in case of earthquakes, as I explained you earlier, the sand is the problematic. So it is very, very important to have undisturbed samples in sand. But that is possible? No, it is not possible. So considering all these practical difficulties, determining modulus reduction damping ratio curves for the routine testing by normal laboratories is difficult. It is a research problem. So then what is the solution? Without that, we won't get the results. So fortunately, standard curves are available by made available by the various researchers. They worked on the different types of soils, and they provided this is the modulus reduction curve. G by G max is called modulus reduction curve. It tells how the modulus is reducing with the strain, and this is for the damping ratio curves. Here you can see there are different curves are given for different materials. This is for the gravel. This is for sand. Okay, and this is clay of plasticity 0, 10, 15, 30, and so on. Okay, so you can use these standard curves. To use these standard curves, what is required? You need to know what type of soil it is, what type of what is its plasticity and all. So that's why you need those properties. Once you have those properties, you can better consider these things. So this is not a problem. It's very easy. It can be done very easily. So we don't have to worry about this. Like we can these methods are pretty much standard. So one can so if you give this problem to any site investigation agency, they can provide this type of a soil and then plasticity characteristics. Based on that, you can get these things. Okay, so regular. geotechnical investigation report is going to be sufficient to choose these curves. Then what about the shear wave velocity? This shear wave velocity is available in normal routine geotechnical investigations? No. So the everything now depends upon the shear wave velocity. So this based on the reliability of the shear wave velocity that you have, your results are going to be accurate. Okay, so let us see what are the different methods available to obtain this shear wave velocity profile. Okay, so there are different methods available. Geotechnical and geophysical methods are available for the determination of the shear wave velocity at the site. Normally, for normal testing, we go for the geotechnical test, SPT, CPT, anyway they are available. So it appears that okay, we can use these tests and then get the shear wave velocity. How to get the shear wave velocity? Suppose from SPT. So there are correlations available between SPT and value and the VS. So we can use that correlation and then we can get. It sounds good, am I right? But it is not so correct method. Okay, it's not so good as it sounds. Okay, this relationship, first of all, the problem with N also, N different people, different agencies, when they do testing, they come up with the different N values and all because of issues with the field testing. I will not go into the details, but even the correlations, VS and N correlation, the number of correlations available, but okay, for the same type of soil, they vary even by 100 to 100%. Okay, the variation primarily because it's very hard to establish a proper relationship between N and VS. Okay, N is a high strain property, SPT. Okay, all geotechnical tests, in fact, are the high strain tests. And shear wave velocity is a wave propagation, is a low strain phenomena. So getting relationship between high strain and low strain for different soils is difficult, and probably it's not possible, exact correct. So that's why different people, they provided different relationships, and we made some study to study how these uncertainties on VS correlations is going to affect the site response. They are going to hugely affect. So of course, for all simple buildings and all, you cannot go for these geophysicals additionally. Okay, for those cases, okay, you can go for this VSN and relationships, and of course there are ways to take care of this. You can take care using the principles of reliability to take care of these variations. So take care of N values, how the N also is going to vary from borehole to borehole at a different depth. So you take a different depth and then find out the mean value and the standard deviation. And similarly, for those mean and standard deviations, you can find out the shear wave velocity using the different correlations, and then from the different correlations also we can obtain the average and mean values. And those values you can, in fact, you can use for normal simple structures, few like 2-3 story structures. But all other important structures like 20 story, 30 story, multi story structures, you cannot go for geotechnical tests. You have to go for the geophysical tests, which provide a more accurate shear wave velocity. There are different geophysical tests: spectral SSW test, multi-channel analysis, MSW test, and cross-hole, up-hole, down-hole test. Out of these tests, the cross-hole is a very good test. Okay, but again, the problem is it is something like SPT. It is an invasive test. You need to drill multiple boreholes. It's going to be very expensive, and only in case of important very high budget constructions you can go. Even if you are going for such a high budget structure construction for cross hole, you cannot go so many cross holes. Okay, because soil is going to be vary. So that's why there is no option other than considering these analysis, SASW and MASW. Okay, these methods are non-invasive tests. They rely on the Rayleigh wave propagation. Okay, so there are a lot of stuff actually I included. I will brief you very briefly. I will explain these SSW, MSW principles and all, and the various challenges involved. Okay, this is going towards the site characterization. Main aspects I have covered, so I will tell you our students have worked extensively on these uncertainties of site characterization using surface view techniques. These SHW, MSW both rely on the principle of wave dispersion. Okay, wave dispersion means particularly Rayleigh waves are going to be used for site characterization. These Rayleigh waves are dispersed in nature. So Rayleigh waves of different frequencies, you can see this is high frequency, medium frequency, long frequency. They will have different lambda, means wavelength, and different wavelength waves, they penetrate to the deeper depths, and then they get the information about the waves. So our principles, all surface waves, SHW, MSW rely on this. So in SHW, MSW, what we'll do is we create artificial disturbance at one point on the surface of the ground using some hammer. Okay, so it generates hammer loading is going to be impulsive, something like this, it appears. But basically impulse loading means it is going to have different frequency waves, as you can see here, this kind of waves. So these different frequency waves, as we discussed, they penetrate to the different depths, and at different depths the soil stiffness is going to be different. So thereby they attain the different velocities, and they reach the geophones that we are going to place at certain distance from the source in a linear form. They reach, and then these geophones are going to record the motions, whatever. Okay, so once these records are available, using these records we are going to interpret the velocity of the soil layers. Okay, so there are I'm skipping these things. Okay, basically these are there in the has a site characterization using SSW, MSW, field testing, and then generation of dispersion curve and inversion. So all these curves, I will just only discuss most important aspects. Though I told you these MSW, SSW are indispensable, there are issues. Okay, in each stage of analysis, there are uncertainties. They can affect the results. So the uncertainty is broadly classified as model-based uncertainty, data measurement uncertainty, in the inversion uncertainty. Both model-based uncertainty arises due to the problems in the model assumed. So what we are assuming in the model that when we are hitting the ground, the Rayleigh waves are generating, but it's not the true. Okay, when you hit the ground, 70% of energy is going to convert into Rayleigh waves, but other waves are also going to be generated. So these waves can be contaminated, and then they can, whatever readings we are getting at the geophones are not the correct readings. Okay, they are not representing true Rayleigh wave propagation, so there will be some errors. And also when suppose the spacings are not proper, okay, or maybe the soil layers below these sensors, if that is heterogeneous, then also that is also going to be affected. What we are assuming in MSW, SHW, that all layers from the ground surface, they are uniform. Okay, so that will affect. And then data measurement uncertainty, when you are measuring at these sensors, whatever we are measuring may be contaminated with the ambient noise, that will also going to affect. And then inversion is the main important step in the ground response in the seismic site characterization. So from the field we are getting the field dispersion curve, and that is not directly providing you the shear wave velocity profile of the soil site. So what you need to do is you need to assume the shear wave velocity profile at the site, and then you need to do the forward modeling, and then you need to construct a theoretical dispersion curve, and then that theoretical dispersion curve you need to match with the field dispersion curve that is obtained from the field study. And then when both are matching, the assumed profile is going to be correct. So, but the problem here in inversion uncertainty, there will be number of profiles which can match with the field dispersion curve. That means there will be number of solutions, and that means equivalent number of profiles will be there representing the same site conditions. So that the response, the seismic site response of these curves, these profiles are going to be different. So our people, we have studied a number of things. Probably this required another presentation. Of course, initially I thought so. Only my idea is to just cover the main important aspects. Okay. Mm, I will share the publication with you. Those research scholars who are interested, they can go through it. These are the publications on the model trace uncertainty, and here are the publications on the data measurement uncertainty and also inversion uncertainty. All the three uncertainties are studied by our group and published in various journals. So this I will make available. So those who have the questions, they can post those questions later also. And there are some new technique also for the site characterization using joint inversion technique that also we did, and then these are some studies. Finally, I need to thank my research scholars, Narayan Rai, who started this study, and Anke Desai, who's continuing, and Bhavesh Pandey has also worked on this, but of course I couldn't able to cover anything from his study due to paucity of the time. And Jitin, Mukesh, Aniket all helped me in preparing this PPT, particularly in animations and all. So thank you all, one and all, for your patient listening.
Thank you, sir.
So I know that there will be a number of questions. I can take up the questions. Okay.
Okay.
So my main focus is the mechanism of local site conditions on the seismic site response and the challenges involved. Okay, how to address? Also, I explained only that part is missing. That is the site characterization part. Okay, that it itself is a big topic. Okay, thank you one and all. Thank you, Professor Behra, for inviting me.
Sir.
Yeah, you can have questions.
So first question is that is it mandatory to model water table in site response analysis?
It is required actually without water table. Like as you all know, whenever there is a water table, the water table is going to affect the effective stresses. Yes or no? Okay. When the water table is high, the effective stresses are going to be reduced. When the effective stresses are reduced, the stiffness, like this, the stiffness of the system, our soil, it depends on the effective stresses. Effective stresses basically provides the confinement. So when the confinement is going to be different, then strength is going to be different, stiffness is going to be different. So it is essential to have the water table look.
Can you please explain once again the significance of 30 meter in VS30, which codes specify 30 meter depth?
Yeah, I explained that again. I can explain because see, this site response problem is different from the normal foundation problem. Okay, site vibrations, ground vibrations are because of the waves coming from the bedrock. So the soil, whatever is there about the bedrock, even if the bedrock is 100 meters below, all the soil is going to play a role. So
please, 1 minute, sir. Somebody has, please mute your audio.
Yeah.
Somebody has.
But the issue is drilling up to 100 meters, 200 meters is out of question. It's not possible. Okay. So that's why codes suggest to go up to 30 meters minimum. Because the top 30 meter soil is going to be significantly influence the site response. Okay, below 30 meter soil, going to be where it go deeper and all, it's going to be stiffer and stiffer, and at least stiffness is going to be stiffness of engineering bedrock like 760 meter per second velocity. So that such velocity are attained, that is not going to influence. But only thing is, of course, that is not going to be valid for all the site conditions, particularly if the soil is very soft. Okay, then in that case, considering top 30 meters only for the site characterization, seismic site characterization is going to be erroneous, totally erroneous. But otherwise, in normal conditions, 30 meters is good enough. Yeah, is there any further question on this?
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sir, if suppose one building is there in a very soft soil, and during the construction that earthquake effect is not being considered.
Okay.
So what remedial measures can be taken after this construction happens?
Okay, it's a very difficult question to answer. Remedial, about the remedial part. Yeah, we can assess the what is going to be the effect. There is no issue. Okay, so without considering the earthquake effects, it is designed. So you know the building characteristics and all. Okay, and you know the soil profile there. So you can do the site response analysis, and then you can obtain the response spectrums, and then you can assess whether what type of loading is going to come on that particular structure, and then you already designed, so you know whether it is going to withstand or not. Okay, so yes, now if you want to safeguard that structure, and then if you found that that structure is vulnerable to damage, then the solution is retrofitting. You cannot change the waves propagation. You cannot like that is inside. Okay, that's what I say. It's a very challenging. You can't do anything that is going to be the domain of the structural engineer. So your role is going to provide the level of acceleration that are expected on this whole structure, and then he has to check whether it is okay or not. So if it is not okay, if the structure is not designed for that, he has to retrofit. Okay, but the problem is, suppose underneath your structure the settlements are expected, suppose ground is liquefying, then what to do? Okay, that is a very difficult thing. Of course solutions are there. You can apply the ground improvement technique. Suppose if structure for footing is there, and then here the soil is expected to lose, it experience a lot of settlements or the liquefaction, then what you need to do is you need to apply ground improvement techniques such as jet whatever 1 minute grouting techniques. Either you have to use the compaction grouting. Compaction grouting is going to densify the soil. Okay, or you can use the jet grouting, which is going to inject the cement slurry to the ground and then make it is stiffer. So such things you need to do. But mostly with the structural aspects,
We cannot change.
going to be otherwise ground improvement techniques. Yes, please.
Right.
I hope
Sir,
I
another queries.
totally.
Sir?
I hope I answered your question in total.
Yes, sir, absolutely right.
Okay.
To 100% of my satisfaction.
Oh.
Okay. The next question is, in retaining structures with great height, what will be the remedies of earthquake?
Remedies of earthquake. Again, the similar problem which we didn't discuss about the retaining walls. So see, in case of retaining walls, mostly the problem is with the liquefaction of the soil. Soil on the backfill, if it liquefies, it's going to exert a lot of dynamic pressures and cause the lateral spreading, and then thereby cause the settlement of the ground, and that is what the case in case of port facilities and all. The solution is take care of this soil, like densify the soil and provide backfill, improve the backfill. That is one. Okay, then other aspect is when earthquake occur, your retaining wall is going to be subjected to dynamic stresses, not only due to liquefaction. So those dynamic stresses you can assess. There are techniques called Mononobe-Wakabe method and Richard Mellon's method. Using those methods, you assess the forces that are going to come, dynamic forces, that inertial forces that are going to come on the structure retaining wall, and see under those forces what is the factor of safety against the sliding, and what is the factor of safety against the overturning. Okay, and if they are satisfying, then it is okay, you don't have to worry. And of course, if they are not satisfying, again you obviously, like a retrofitting, you need to improve, you need to modify. So what you need to do probably, like you just change. Okay, retrofit. I don't know exactly how to retrofit a retaining wall, frankly. Okay, but we can understand, like basically suppose the sliding is taking place under earthquake loading, so increase the base. Obviously when you increase the base, resistance is going to increase, so it will take care, and then you're increasing the mass, obviously overturning also will be taken care. Okay, yes.
The next question is, which codes specify 30-meter depth criteria?
30-meter depth criteria, NHREP guidelines, and most of the all like codes, Euro code 7 or any code, you even AC 7 or Euro code, they all uses the 30-meter concept. it became so standard practice in earthquake engineering. Okay, we can refer that ASC 7 Eurocode and NEHRP classification scheme. Yeah.
So another query, the response spectra is going to be constant for a soil or it will vary? If so, how to consider it?
So that's what we discussed in our presentation. The response spectrum, like see, as I explained, each soil deposit is going to have a different response, and thereby the ground shaking is going to be different in case of each soil deposit. As the ground shaking is different, each soil is going to have a unique response spectrum. And then how to determine? By doing the ground response analysis. You need the bedrock motion and then do the ground response analysis and get the surface motion.
Sure.
And then response spectrum.
Sir, I think there is no further question. So we can wind up the session. So first of all, I would like to thank you for your beautiful presentation with that much of animation. I have to learn animation from you. Then
first time I included animations, my own animations I created. So I never created like so. Thank you.
I think most of our participants are benefited from your presentation. The way you have described all these things, starting from the importance to different aspects, particularly to the local site effects. So, and also I request your kind permission to share the PPT among our participants in PDF mode. So please kindly send the PPT for sharing to our participants. And second thing is that sir, I'm grateful on behalf of our department as well as on behalf of our participants for giving the consent in a very quick time despite your busy schedule during this pandemic. Thank you, sir. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you very much, Professor Behra.